There was a baby there. How many of you had silent nights when there's a baby involved? No way. That scares us, right? And then there were cows and horses and chickens and zebras and donkeys and I don't know what all there. That's awesome. Hey, thank you. A lot of great worship opportunities coming over the next few weeks. We're looking forward to that. I think our kids are going to be singing in a couple of weeks, and we'll look forward to that. And then a special morning, Christmas Eve morning. I believe we're meeting at 10 o'clock. Is that right? 10 o'clock that morning. No live class. We'll be meeting at 10 o'clock, and that's going to be a great worship time. And so, as I often say, for those of you that are new with us, it is a come as you are, except not in your pajamas, okay? Do step above that. But I know things will be busy that morning, and what a great place to be, Christmas Eve morning. Be here. We'll have a great worship time, be a little abbreviated. But a great worship time that morning, and then back that afternoon, 4:30, for our candlelight service, and that's always a really, really special time. So encourage you to be here. It's fantastic. Turn to John 9. Go ahead and get there, okay? John chapter 9, if you didn't get there earlier with the warning that I gave you. So we talk a lot about God working, and, that runs anywhere from you're looking at something in your own personal life, and you think, whew, I just need God to work there because you can't come up with any other way that something can happen here. Other than that, it's maybe you're making the mistake of watching the news or you're flipping through on social media. You're scrolling and thinking, wow, we need God to work, right? So curiosity. Why God works in the times, in the places, in the ways that he does, kind of tough for us to figure out. We're not supposed to know that, right? It's God's business because he knows and understands things we don't. We can think about, though, how do we react when God works? What do you do when God works? And I think there are a variety of reactions that happen there. And either anticipating what God's doing in your life or what he may be doing coming up. And when he works, how are we to respond there? And to get ready for that. Now, be careful here, because some might think, wait, are we trying to engineer when God will work and how God will work by how we prepare? No. Again, that's God's business, okay? But we ought to be thinking about how we would react and what we do when God works. And there's some lessons, I think, for us in John chapter 9. There's a lot here. And I'm not going to read the entire chapter for you right now. I'd encourage you to do that when you have time. But we're going to touch a lot of different things. So let me give you three things that happen when God works. Number one is this: he does things only he can do. So when God works, he does things only he can do. Nobody else gets the credit. It's got to be him. Number two, the true nature of people is revealed. The true nature of people is revealed. And then number three, opportunities arise. Opportunities arise. Let's talk about those things. And so the situation that's happening in John chapter 9 is that there's this man. Look with me at this. Verse 1, it says that there's a man who's blind from birth. So as Jesus was passing by, this is what's happening. Look at verse 2. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he has been born blind? Wow, what a question. There was an understanding in that day, which unfortunately I'm not so sure hasn't completely gone away. I mean, he's been born blind. He's being punished. And the thought line of the day was anything that, anybody was dealing with, some, serious infirmity, sickness, etc., would be a direct result of sin, either on the part of that person or maybe the previous generation. Well, isn't that a pious way to look at things? Look at somebody. Anybody have a cold? You better not, because you shouldn't be here if you do. I was testing you. So we look at somebody and there's something going on in their life, and we look very judgmentally at them and think, well, what have you done? You ever heard anybody do that? It's pretty rough. But that was the thinking of the day. And now, definitely, no doubt, there are times, many times, that we sin and we have consequences to bear, right? We know that, sure. But there's a lot of things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis that are the result of a fallen world. This world's a mess, just reality. It has been since the garden. It will be until God calls an end to all of this, right? So, that's the situation here. Jesus answers, look at verse 3. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. It doesn't mean they've never sinned, because we know they're sinners, right? He's talking about it. No, there's no specific sin or sins that have caused this. This came about so that God's works might be displayed in him. Wow. Wow. So we have sin. We have struggles. We have challenges we deal with in life. Every single one of us. We start telling our story and oh, woe is me, and we find out not long after that there's somebody else that, I'm kind of ashamed I even told my story because somebody else has it worse, right? Now, I'm not talking about those one-upman or one-downman type of people. You tell your story, well, let me tell you how bad my life is. But, that's the reality. I mean, we all deal with a lot of things. But, when we let God work in those situations in our life, then there's a chance for him to gain glory from that. And in gaining glory, there's a chance for our people to be drawn to him. And so as we deal with the stuff of life, God knows that. And we've already dealt with this, and just touch it real quickly. We've already dealt with this several weeks ago. There was all this sickness that Jesus was seeing while he was here on earth. Could he have just, in a moment of thought, healed every sickness on the face of the earth at that time? I'll give you a hint. The answer is yes, right? But he didn't. We deal with a lot of things as a result of a fallen world. Jesus is concerned about those things, yes. He is much more concerned about those things that are permanent, and that's the condition of your soul and mine. And so he'll work in and through the temporary things of life, and at times he steps in and does things that only he can do out of concern, yes, for the individual, but out of a greater concern of how this impacts. You see, what's happening here in chapter 9 is there's this one guy, he's been blind from birth, and he's dealt with the struggle of that all of his life. And as we find out later on in this chapter, he is an adult at this point. Exactly what age, we don't know. So he's been dealing with this now a couple of decades, potentially, maybe more. And as Jesus worked in his life, here we are in 2023, still talking about what God did in his life. Lives still being impacted by what Jesus did in his life at this point. Wow. God can step in and use the challenges and circumstances of life and can step in and do things that only he can do. But there is something that's required in that. Look at what he says in verse 4. Verse 4, Jesus said these things. He spoke of being the light of the world. As long as he's in the world, he's the light of the world, most certainly. Another of those I am sayings of Jesus. Verse 6, he said, after he said those things, he spit on the ground. He made some mud. Can you imagine this scene, really? After he said these things, he spit on the ground. He made some mud from his spit. And he spread the mud on the man's eyes. I just got to get the scene. Can you imagine the disciples? What are you doing? Really? Verse 7, he says, go. Go, he told him. Wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he left, washed, and came back seeing. Not, hey, who's touching me? No, hey, don't put that on my eyes. What are you doing to me? Go wash in the pool of Siloam. Why? I wash my eyes all the time. It's not done any good. I wonder how many times God steps in and wants to do something in our life in places that only He could do something, and we say, God, that doesn't make sense, and we're not obedient. You ever been guilty of that? God works through our obedience. We don't really know at this point what this man knows about Jesus. What we find out later on is apparently not much, because when he was questioned later, he says, I don't know. But he was obedient. We talk about, there's so many times in our circles, maybe those are the amen circles, we talk about, we just need God to, when we're talking about a situation, a person, we just need God to. I wonder sometimes if maybe the reason he doesn't is because he already knows we're not going to be obedient. So he does know the future, right? Nothing takes God by surprise. How responsive, I'm asking us this question, so I'll just say it this way. How responsive are we when God tells us to do something that really doesn't make a lot of sense? That we can't see how valuable this, God speaks to you and says, there's been a situation, there's been a relationship that's kind of a mess, and God, maybe during a prayer time tells you, you need to go talk to this. I am not going to go talk to them. I've talked to them before, it hasn't done any good, I'm not doing it. And then God doesn't heal the relationship. Maybe it's because we're not being obedient. Could it be? Check our obedience. Because when God shows up, He does something that only God can do. And the reality is we need God on a larger scale, smaller, down to the individual, to do things that only He can do, because we just can't. I mean, that's the heart of worship that we talk about a lot, just like we do on Sunday mornings. It's this acknowledgement of, God, we need You. We can't, and He can. So when God works, he does things that only He can do. And we need to be obedient in that. And just go ahead and plan on the front end that we're going to be obedient, whatever God tells us to do and whenever God tells us to do it. Secondly, fortunately, the true nature of people is revealed. I mean, it's an incredible thing. This guy, he's been blind from birth. He goes, it says, according to verse 7, he left, he washed, he came back, he can now see. Neighbors, friends are saying, wow, no, that's not the same guy. Yes, it is. I know this guy. Well, that's really not him. This can't happen. And so they're arguing back and forth about whether this is the guy or not. I love this. Verse 9, he kept saying, notice that, he kept saying, I'm the one. He kept interjecting it. Really, it's me. It's me. I mean, can you imagine being blind for decades? And now, he had never seen green grass. He'd never seen a sunset. He heard the voices of all these friends, but he'd never seen their faces, and now he can. And while they're arguing back and forth, it's me. True nature of people is revealed. I see three groups at work here in the next few verses, and this is hard, challenging. It says in 13 that they brought the man who used to be blind to the Pharisees. And the note is, verse 14, that the day that this man was healed was the Sabbath day. Sabbath's for rest. It's for worship. It's not for healing. Or so they thought. And they're upset. It's not the only time the Pharisees will get upset when Jesus works on the Sabbath and does something awesome. It's kind of strange to me to be arguing with the one who made the Sabbath about how he should and shouldn't. But, they didn't get that, right? And so the Pharisees, let's make sure we get this right. The Pharisees, look at 15. Pharisees asked him again how he received his sight. And so you'll notice that as we go a little bit farther, this man is being asked not once or twice. He's being asked repeatedly, we don't understand what happened. Again, because God's done something that only God can do. They can't come up with a human explanation for it. People that don't have the relationship that allows them to see from a spiritual standpoint, kind of giving it away. You see that very specifically at the end of the chapter. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't add up. This is not anything we can explain. And so they're asking him again and again and again and again. And the guy just tells them, hey, he put mud on my eyes, I washed it, and I can see. Some of the Pharisees are angry, I think. It's pretty obvious. This man, verse 16, this man's not from God because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. Doesn't mention the fact that he was blind. Yeah, anyway, wow. Okay, hang on. But others were saying, how can a sinful man perform such signs? There was division among them. So just like the friends and neighbors were arguing back and forth, now the Pharisees are arguing back and forth about this. And so 17, again, they ask. I don't know what they were expecting. Notice this. Again, they ask him, what do you say about, verse 17, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? The guy responds, he's a prophet. I mean, the guy knew that, hey, there's something spiritual happening here. There's something bigger than me and you happening here. The Jews did not believe him about this, that he was blind and received sight, until they summoned the parents. Well, what are they doing in summoning the parents? Look at 19. 19, is this your son, the one you say was blind? How then does he now see? In this, you see a question, you see an accusation, and yeah, you also do see admission. The question, is this your son? Hear the accusation, the one that you say, do you catch that? The one that you say was born blind. Well, there were a lot of people that knew this guy that knew that about him. But they've hauled the parents in. Anything they can do to discredit Jesus, they've not gotten anywhere with the guy, so they bring his parents in. And they did have the admission, the one who had received his sight. Couple of groups at play here. Would it be fair to say that the Pharisees were bullies? Yeah, I think so. I mean, there were some guys that had some level of power and influence of the day, and they didn't mind exercising it. You see it all during the earthly ministry of Jesus. When they're getting kind of frustrated, they'd call everybody in, and so they'd all gather up and best robes, and, and here they go. And that's what they were doing. They've not gotten anywhere with the guy, so hey, they just, got rid of him, and let's bring the parents in, and we're going to bow up on them. You'll see the full explanation on this in a moment. Well, let's just go ahead and get this in now. So the parents' response, hang on, we're going to get to that. But the parents respond, and the way that they responded was, look at 22. His parents said these things because they were afraid of the Jews, since the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him as the Messiah, that person would be banned from the synagogue. You can't come worship anymore. Oh my. You can't come sacrifice anymore. You can't, that was the way to have a relationship with God. You can't have that. The Pharisees were saying, we'll put ourselves between you and God and we'll keep you. Wow. Have you ever met a bully? Of course you have. There are bullies everywhere. Do you know there were bullies even in religious circles? Do you know there are bullies even in church? Absolutely. And there have been so many people that have left church and churches because of bullies. People that get a little bit of power and they let it go to their head and then it becomes about them and not about him. And that's exactly what had happened with these Jews. They were bullying not only this man, but they were bullying even his parents. They decided, okay, we can't get anywhere with him. Let's bow up on the parents. Let's put out this rule. If anybody says that Jesus is the Messiah, we're not going to let you come to church anymore. Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, what about the parents? Well, here's their opportunity, right? So, second group. The parents are questioned. I want you to watch what they said. So they're asked, is this your son? The one you say was born blind. How then does he see? It says in verse 20, we know this is our son. Okay? We own him. Yep, he's our son. We know that he was born blind, his parents answered. Watch this. But we don't know how he sees, and we don't know who opened his eyes. He's of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself. Problem with that? Dad and mom have watched their son struggle for, again, I'm just guessing. It says he's of age. He's an adult in their culture. They've watched him for a couple of decades struggle with being blind. Never having been able to see. Can you imagine, and some of you may be able to, can you imagine how hard that would be? To watch your child deal with this for a couple of decades with no hope of ever seeing? And now you begin to hear a buzz. News travels fast even in that day. And what you've heard and what people are saying, and son's on his way to the house, and hey, by the way, he can see. No, what are you talking about? He can't. And then son shows up at the house and he sees his mom and dad's face for the first time. Can you imagine what that'd be like? Wow. And now right after that, they get hauled in front of the bullies, the Pharisees, and have an opportunity to give praise and give honor. And he's ours, but you talk to him and leave us out of this. Wow. Do you know how bullies get their power? We give it to them. When we're cowardly. Have you ever wondered why so many times when Jesus stepped onto the scene, you see this in the Gospels over and over. Do you wonder why sometimes why did Jesus so many times when he stepped onto the scene say, fear, what was it? Not. Do not be afraid. How many times? I wonder why. Because he knows how we are. We're weak. As much as we want to be strong, we come up against things that we don't really have the capacity to deal with, and it's scary. And these parents, I've already read the explanation to you, but what John wrote here was that they said these things because they were more afraid of the Jews than they were excited about the miracle that happened in their son. I interjected that part, but you see it fits, okay? They were afraid of the Jews. We won't be able to go worship. We won't be able to go sacrifice. Wow. Have you ever seen God working in an area and some bullies started talking and started running their mouths and putting that down and negating heard a pastor years ago, he used to call that the cold water committee. You know, God does something, there's always somebody wanting to throw cold water on it. And you're excited, and God did this, and God showed up, and God did this work in this person's life, or in this family situation, or in this church situation, or a community situation, and yay! Wait. Yay. Because we don't want to draw too much attention. Because we don't want to get involved. And even when questioned, because, hey, that didn't happen just the way that we think it ought to happen, well, okay, leave me out of it. Well, the bullies reigned there. Well, they didn't get anything out of the parents necessarily. They didn't get what they were looking for because the parents didn't really give them much ammo. But they also had an opportunity the parents also had an opportunity to do something pretty awesome, but they backed off and they were cowardly here. It's repeated. I think this is interesting. Look at 23. This is why the parents said, he's of age, ask him. You know, kind of a washing of hands of their own son. Wow. Am I being harsh there? I am. I know I am. But too often that's exactly what happens. And Scripture's, I think, speaking of that pretty strong. So what happens? Look at 24. So a second time they summoned the man who had been blind, and they told him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. We know what's going on. You give glory to God. The answer that they receive is not one they expected. Look at 25. 25, he says, whether or not he's a sinner, I don't know. One thing, I love this. One thing I do know, I was blind and now I can see. Wow. What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? Pause here. Told you three groups. God works. There's always the bullies that, hey, this is not the way we thought it should be done. This is not the prescribed way. This doesn't fit historically. This is not in accordance with certain policies or traditions or, it's whatever. It's just, I heard a man one time talk about something that God was doing, and he finally admitted he was mad about it because he wasn't involved with it. I wonder, no wonder. And then there are cowards, people that ought to be standing up to the bullies. People ought to be supporting and praising God for what's being done. Here's an opportunity for the parents to join in with their son, but instead they leave him to speak alone. Wow. It's so important that we use our influence to shore up people that God's working in their lives. Not to be so concerned about what's going to happen to us. Let God take care of that. Third group is this guy. It's just this ordinary guy. And they've asked him, they keep asking him. In verse 27, what he does is not just walk away, not cower down, not agree. Instead, verse 27, he says, I already told you, and you didn't listen. You don't talk like that way to these guys. But he did. He said, I already told you, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want it to become his disciples, do you? He turned the tables on them. Wow. What do you see happening here? He's a warrior. That's who he is. I mean, there are bullies, there are cowards, and then there are warriors. They're the ordinary people who have an opportunity to do something extraordinary. Not because of who they are. By the way, did anyone see the man's name listed? Me either. Anybody see any background? Me either. He's just an ordinary man that has an opportunity to be a part of something extraordinary. And he takes that opportunity and he does it. And so as he's being challenged repeatedly, he stands up and he challenges back. He said, look, I've already told you didn't listen. Even when, verse 28, it says they ridiculed him. That's what bullies do, right? Flex, put on the power. If that doesn't work, we'll just make a fool out of you. We'll make you look stupid. We'll make you look silly. That's what bullies do. You're that man's disciple, verse 28, you're that man's disciple, but we're Moses' disciples. Ha! We'll top you. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but this man, we don't know where he's from. Man doesn't back down. I was looking. I looked through words that are opposite of cowardly, and I came up with words like brave and courageous, valiant, stout-hearted, lion-hearted, of courage. I'd rather that be said of me than cowardly, wouldn't you? Even as the bullies pressed in. Now, God's worked. He's done an awesome thing. And now it's about who gets the credit. And now it's about how things happened and why they happened. And this argument and debate over that. And the heart of the Pharisees pushed. The heart of this man pushed back. Look at 30. He said, this is an amazing thing. You don't know where he's from, yet he opened my eyes. You're so smart. Why can't you figure out how this happened? We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he listens to him. Throughout history, no one has ever heard of someone opening the eyes of a person born blind. If this man is not from God, he wouldn't be able to do anything. He just lays it out there. He has to be from God because I was blind and now I can see. It's never happened before that I know about or that you know about. That had to come from somewhere. Had to be from God. You know, it ties back, do you remember? It ties back to John 3. And Nicodemus come to Jesus at night and said, look, we don't get it. We've been talking. And we know that you must be from God because no other way that these things could happen. That common theme is there. That Jesus was doing things that only God could do. And they were seeing that. They were seeing it over and over and over and still fighting against it. Does that make any sense to you? You ever fought God because he didn't work in the way that you expected? You ever fought God because he didn't work in the time you expected? You ever fought God because he didn't do things just like you wanted them done? You ever seen God working and watched people fighting against God's work and you had an opportunity to step in and you had an opportunity to influence and instead you went, not me. I mean, I know God's at work and I see the evidence of that, but you leave me out of it. We're scared of what it might cost us, even though God's doing an amazing thing. Wow. I don't want to be a part of either of those groups, but let's be honest, any of us can be. I'd rather be like this guy. He's in a tough spot. He's in a dilemma, most certainly. Because what we know about this guy, he's a Jewish man. He understands what you are to do and not do on the Sabbath. What he knows is he was blind, but now he can see. He's a Jewish man. He understands that he is to honor his father and mother. What he knows is his father and mother are not supporting him at one of the most critical points in his life. What do you do? If you are anxious for God to work and expecting that the majority around you will stand up and cheer the work of God, you'd best check Scripture. Most often, the people that we would expect to stand and cheer the work of God either fight against it or just stand back and say, leave me out of it. Great quote that many of you have heard and know by Theodore Roosevelt says, "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs and comes up short again and again, because there is no effort without error or shortcoming, but who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither knew victory nor defeat." Well said. Well said. So what does it matter in the end? Well, quickly, verse 35 and following. Here's why it matters. Jesus heard they'd thrown the man out, and when he found him, did you get that? When Jesus heard they had thrown the man out, and when Jesus found him, the implication there is strong. Jesus looked for him and found him. Because he's alone. Friends are arguing back and forth. Mom and Dad have been no help. And he asked him, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him? You hear the obedience? Jesus answered, you have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. I believe, Lord, and he worshiped him. Jesus said, I have come to this world for judgment, in order that those who do not see will see, and those who do see will become blind. Some of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things. They asked him, we aren't blind too, are we? The response of Jesus is, if you were blind, you wouldn't have sinned. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. Oh, in their arrogance and in their pride, they also found condemnation. Because they said, we see, we understand, we know. Wow. So you anxious for God to work? You know, when God works, it's not that there's neutral impact all around. No, it's significant. When God works, there's nothing that Satan can do about that, right? God chooses to do a work. I mean, Satan has no. I mean, it's just nothing. But he can come in right afterwards and make a mess. He can come in right afterwards and cause doubt and confusion. He can come in right afterwards and bring in fear and questioning, and very often does. So how do we respond? How do we get ready when we pray and ask God to do something? When we're praying and asking for God to work, when we look and we just see God show up and do something in somebody's life, what are we doing? Well, get ready for the battle that's about to begin. We don't want to fall in the camp of the bully that says it's not being done the way that I think it ought to be done and bowing up. We don't want to fall in the camp of the coward that says, well, I'm glad that, but leave me out of it. Instead, we want to be that man of God, that woman of God that steps up and says, look, I don't understand all of it. I don't know exactly what all happened, but I was blind, but now I see. I recognize the work of God and brag on him, give him praise for what he has done, and that only he deserves that honor and that praise. Bow with me. Father, I thank you, because you work in ways that only you can work. God, you're the only one, and just acknowledge this before you. You are the only one that deserves any credit. And God, I know you see the challenges that are in our own lives, the challenges in our families, in our church, in churches, in our communities. God, we so desperately need you to intervene and do things that only you can do. God, forgive us when we're cowardly, please. I think it's for good reason that you tell us don't be afraid, because you know we are fearful. And God, I thank you forgive us when we allow ourselves to get in the way of you. When our own pride, when our own self-worth we deem as more important than you. When we're upset because you've not worked in the way that we think you ought to work or you once did. When we're so caught up with us that we miss you. We don't want to be that. God, I see you calling men and women all throughout this church and in this community, in this world. I see you calling men and women to be men and women of valor, of great courage. And you're equipping them for the tasks that are before them. And God, I'm thankful for that. And God, we've seen that throughout history, that you've raised up mighty men and mighty women that would challenge the status quo of the day, that would challenge the bullies and challenge the cowards and worship and praise you for doing only those things that you can do. God, we want to be that for you, for your honor, for your glory, never for our own. We see that friend that's lost and going to spend an eternity in hell. Could we be that man of courage for him? We see that lady who's in a relationship and she's hurting and she's scared. Could we be that lady that'll be there for her and help her and pray with her? And God, we see that situation with that teenager who's struggling and thinks nobody cares. Could we be that man or woman or family of bravery that can step in there and be that person that you work through to change their world? God, please raise up those. God, help us to commit this day to be obedient to whatever you tell us to do. Whether we understand it or not, just be obedient to what you tell us to do. Whether it makes sense or not, just to be obedient to what you tell us to do. So that you do only what you can do, which is our greatest need.